This is a Middle-earth philosopher. In the lore of Middle-earth, there are many famous weapons that are used by equally famous characters, yet none are perhaps revered or as detailed in reverence as the Sword of Elendil and his descendant Beregrond, Narsil AKA Anduril. The blade is held in high regard as one of the major signs of the lineage of kings that goes back to not just Numenor, but back to the First Age when it was first created by the dwarf Telchar. Once again, shout out to the dwarves for making the best shit in Middle-earth. Anyway, despite this long history, the sword is only seen with such admiration by Aragorn, presumably the rest of the Northern Dunedain. In the movies, Boromir initially, when he first saw it before Aragorn started giving him sus looks, and the elves in Rivendell who reforged it centuries later after it got curb stomped by a particular Maiar. But the reverence is enough that Aragorn is extremely protective of it, even in the books threatening a Rohan guard who is required to confiscate all weapons from visitors of the king in order to protect him. Essentially a dude just doing his job. And in the movie Fellowship of the Ring, as I mentioned earlier, when Boromir had picked up the broken blade and Aragorn started giving him evil looks, which in this particular scene, movie Aragorn comes closest to book Aragorn in terms of depiction, when the broken heirloom was picking up. So then my question is this: does Anduril deserve such worship? And to put this into context, I'm going to compare it to another legendary weapon from the Star Trek franchise, the Sword of Kahless, the legendary Moses-like figure of the Klingons. The conversation between the older Kor and the younger Klingon Worf basically depicts the heart of this question.
This is the Sword of Kahless. It is not something to shovel food into your mouth. It must be treated with honor.
Kahless himself used it to skin the Serpent of Zal, to harvest his father's field, to carve a statue of his own beloved. It's a sword!
Now, I play this scene because essentially what Kor is objectively speaking is correct when applied to not just the Sword of Kahless, but also to Narsil. That despite its ancient lineage, at the end of the day, both blades were just swords. They were objects, things that were created by long dead people and passed down from one person to another who are now also long dead. And in the case of Narsil/Anduril, that much of that history being questionable because other than knowing that Telchar made it, we know very little about the time between that and when it got into the hands of Elendil somehow. Yes, it was known for being the blade that cut the One Ring from Sauron's finger. But honestly, arguably any sword could have done the job given the opportunity. I mean, let's face it, Anduril wasn't going to single-handedly destroy the One Ring, nor vanquish the armies of Sauron from Middle-earth all by its lonesome. Now, Worf's reaction to Kor's blunt analysis also mirrors Aragorn's. How dare anyone question the legitimacy of Anduril, the sword held by the last High King of the United Dunedain Kingdom, one of the few surviving relics from the First and Second Ages, thousands upon thousands of years, and possibly held by other High Lords or Kings between that time and the time that it was eventually broken. I don't think that Tolkien's precedent for mentioning important weapons actually applies here, because to be quite frank, most of them are gone and barely remembered. Some only remembered for one particular feat, and that was more or less it, such as the elven knife Angrist that was used by Beren to remove the Cimmeril from Morgoth's crown. I mean, you would think that, given the importance of the blade, that it would be passed down. Yet, after his first death, we never hear of it again. Not if it was passed down to Dior, his son, or if it was somehow taken by the sons of Fëanor during their sack of Menegroth. Nothing. Not a whisper, not a word. And arguably the same thing could apply for Glamdring, the Sword of Turgon. We barely hear of it during the stories of the First Age, and it only comes into prominence during the thousands of years later, during the Third Age, for the War of the Ring. I think the reasoning for the worship of this particular object, Narsil / Anduril, is that it's like the One Ring in terms of its story function. A secondary background character whose importance lay not in itself, but how others perceived it. To the people I mentioned earlier, yes, Narsil was an ancient broken heirloom, but it was also part of their belief system in that it physically embodied the values that they were desperately trying to hold on to in dark times. Values that were already disappearing from the world, much like the presence of the elves in a way. And this is mirrored with the Sword of Kahless in Star Trek DS9, in how Worf wanted to use the sword in a similar manner to unite the Klingon people from its own political divisions, cleanse the corruption from the society, and remind Klingons just what it meant to be Klingon. If Anduril was somehow lost or destroyed again for a second time during the Lord of the Rings, it certainly would not have ended the quest, and I'm pretty certain it wouldn't have truly affected Aragorn's claim to the remaining throne of the Dunedain. But it would have been a deeply personal and cultural loss to him and the Northern Dunedain. It would be similar in scale, but smaller, much smaller, with what the loss of Numenor was to Elendil and the other Numenorean survivors after its destruction. But it would carry much more weight than that because Anduril was much closer to home. It was tangible and not some old tale that was passed down by lore masters. But other than that, let me know your own thoughts below if you think that Narsil / Anduril deserved the praise that it got, or if you think it was essentially replaceable. This is Miller Philosopher, and have a good day.